Hello and welcome to Transforming Tomorrow, the podcast from the Pentland Centre for Sustainability in Business here at Lancaster University Management School. I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Bebbington.
I've been worried several times on this podcast before, Jan. I've been worried when we had the accountants in. I've been worried when we've got the lawyers in. Now we've got people who do evaluations in. And this really does seem like we're asking for trouble.
Well, especially towards the end of our first full series, to do evaluation at the end, definitely sounds like we're about to be grilled. Who's grilling who here?
I don't know. We'll find out when this goes on. Are you not worried about the results if they do start evaluating our progress over the last 12 months? Yeah. F. Go away, rethink, restart, do it entirely differently next time. Okay, we'll see what happens. Yes, we're joined by two members of a team who specialise in creative evaluation. There's Dr. Elisavet Christou, who's a lecturer here in the Management School, and then we've got Senior Research Associate and PhD Researcher Violet Owen, who is from the Lancaster Institute for the Contemporary Arts, the first member of LICA that we've had on the podcast, so that's a good start. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Elisavet and Violet, co-authors along with Pinar Sayan of a little book of creative evaluation, which goes all into various different aspects of how we can evaluate things and do it in a way that's not just your bog standard manner, Jan. So I'd like to think if we ever did evaluation of this podcast, which I'm worried about still looking at them, we would do it in a creative way.
Well, I think we should read their book more carefully and have a go.
Happy to help.
She says with a smile, but that seems scary.
Scary. Happy to, I think they have said they have been listening to this podcast. I'm worried they've already evaluated us and that this is just actually when the results are going to get delivered. We'll find out. I'll get you both, first of all, to just introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do together and what it is that creative evaluation is, and we'll get into all of that as a topic. Elisavet.
Sure. So as you said already, I'm a lecturer at the Management School, but before that, I did my PhD in computing and then my postdoc in design. So a lot of the work I do, it's interdisciplinary, and it brings that transdisciplinary approach to research. My focus is transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary methodologies, and it so happens that bringing elements from computing, management, design, and evaluation has produced a lot of rich outcomes in terms of evaluation that have been well received. So one thing leads to the other, and we ended up collaborating with Violet and Pinar on various projects like the little book of creative evaluation. With Pinar and our colleague from Manchester Metropolitan University, Philip Ely, we developed a project evaluation tool called EViD that has been commercialized by Lancaster University. With Pinar and Violet, we've developed an exploratory framework for evaluation using the biophysical context from biophysics. And other projects. So a lot of what we do is bringing these exploratory creative approaches, and specifically in creative evaluation, the work we've done is all about different creative approaches to evaluation, not just one framework, not just one theory, but different approaches that either bring creative thinking into the evaluation process or creative methods. And these methods can be from the arts, from design, from other disciplines. And it's not just one thing. It's lots of different things, and we're very happy that people are interested in it because it helps us move forward with our research as well.
Sounds like not been up to much. Just a bit quiet, not a lot of work going on there. Sounds like that to me. That sounds like a lot of the people who do evaluation work, actually. They just pretend to do work and just assess what other people
I think what we're going to uncover is that what we might just say, oh, well, that's an evaluation, is different from evaluation. I think that's going to be the really interesting thing.
I've worked with Elisavet before on some of her work around creative. I am actually aware of what it all involves, and it is really quite fascinating. The various different ways that you can do evaluation, because it's not just all tick boxes or, yes, you've done okay in these last 6 months, we'll let you stay on in your job and you're not getting fired. That, which is what a lot of people might just view evaluations as. That might be the only time they ever come across them. But no, there's a whole lot more to it. Violet, we've heard from Elisavet, so you can just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, so I suppose there's a lot of similarities between myself, Elisavet, and Pinar in terms of that we're all interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary researchers. So like Elisavet, I came from a different background. So I started actually in education. Before I did my PhD, I was a design and technology teacher for nearly a decade. Did an MA in education, and then I moved back into design. So my undergrad was in design. Moved back over into design and got interested in evaluation. So there was an opportunity for me to do a PhD PhD, and they wanted someone who was interested in doing a PhD around evaluation. And I thought, actually, I don't know much about evaluation. It's not something I'd really considered before. And I was like, what a cool thing to actually try and do a PhD in, and bring different perspectives to it, and bring this knowledge that I've got from education, from design, into an evaluation playing field. So that's where I started at Lancaster, and then I met Elisavet and I met Pinar. Pinar's also my supervisor, and we've been doing lots of research together now for the last 4 years. So yeah, that's where my journey started in evaluation, and yeah, where we've got to now.
I suppose we should recognise the third person who unfortunately isn't in the room, because she's tucked up in bed with a summer piece of flu. So Pinar, if you're listening to this, we wish you were here, and we hope you did get well, which I'm sure you will have. Next time, indeed. So you were talking about design, and I guess that I don't really know what design is, but I suspect I know good design when I see it, and I somehow look at something and think great, and don't even consciously evaluate it and realise what good design is. So what's the field of design? What does that field look at?
I mean, I think it covers many different things. People often think of design when they think of products, and that is definitely a big aspect of design. But it's also services and systems and processes. And the way that we use design is often thinking about our approach to something, and less about the thing that we're creating, but how we might go about creating something.
Yes, I think, like you say, Jen, you know whether design is good when you see it or experience it or interact with it. And for us, it's that same thing, that depending on your priority, if your priority is to increase usefulness or effectiveness or adaptability or usability, depending on what your priority is, the design process helps you do that. So the way to evaluate whether a design is good or not is on its effects. Has it been effective? Has it achieved its goal? And very often design is a very interesting way to achieve that goal of improving something, changing something, bringing a new element within something that exists. It's all about processes. It's all about exploring and bringing creativity into that process of rethinking and redesigning or designing from scratch. And it's all about synthesis and analysis. So it's an interesting combination of both bringing different elements, being able to analyze them in new ways that bring new insights and findings. So yeah, design to see if to be able to say if it's good or not. Has it been effective in what it was set out to achieve?
I'm now having flashbacks. Having recently done a low carbon full renovation of a house, the design of the process was not great. The design of the products we're quite happy with, but many, many sleepless nights wondering how they were going to organise this and communicate it with us. So thank you. I now know. Yeah, I shall calm myself down and stop having flashbacks and hand over to Paul in the meantime.
I'm just wondering if when it comes to working on design and appreciating good design, great design, and evaluating design stuff, does having the different backgrounds that you have teaching computing, do they complement the whole process and people bringing in different skills to the process?
I definitely think so. And I think that's something that design really values and really prioritises. So if I think across actually a lot of my colleagues that I work with in Imagination, many of them, in fact, probably most of them have quite diverse backgrounds. And that might be coming, from industry, that might be coming from working in a different discipline, and then they've transitioned into design. And I can speak for myself as a designer. I really value the different sorts of knowledge that people bring from different disciplines and experiences. Can
you explain what Imagination is? Because there'll be a lot of our listeners who don't necessarily know that.
Yeah, so that's Imagination Lancaster. So it's a design-led research lab in a part of the Lancaster Institute for Contemporary Arts.
Elisavet?
No, I totally agree. For me, I cannot imagine a designer who has a very narrow a very niche field of knowledge. Usually good designers and good design researchers bring together lots of different expertise, experiences, knowledge. They're open-minded, hopefully, to learn from others and to keep learning from other fields. So for me, in computing, for example, when we were designing the EViD tool, which, by the way, it took us 3 years and we failed twice in our process, which was great because designers embrace failure. You fail, you learn, you keep going. You learn from that and you create something better. So we embrace that. So the final version of it, we brought a design process from computing, from interface design, which is aligned defined design. And we adopted that for our tool, which is all about exploring and designing project evaluations. So we don't tell people what to do. We just help them with a tool that has a step-by-step methodology and a visualized process to think about as a team and bring together other voices in the process, stakeholders, partners, the project team members, what they need to do evaluation-wise and how to do it. So it's all about thinking and discussing and coming together to an understanding. And our process, borrowing from computing, that design process of aligning, defining, designing, helps methodologically helps that process.
And that really then speaks to an earlier podcast that we had from Lauren Thornton, who has, again, a computer science background, but also social sustainability, social scientist understanding of that. And so she was, our listeners might remember that she was looking at trustworthy and accountable decision support tools from a design perspective. And so I'm part of that project, and I suddenly realised I've been exposed to design, but no one ever said the D word to me, so I didn't realise. So this is a lovely chance to sort of uncover things that I've been doing anyway, but didn't actually identify them as clearly as I could have.
I think both terms, design and evaluation, could be funneled into a specific definition that doesn't cover a whole lot of what both of them encompass.
And I suppose that's maybe a good time to pick up the word evaluation, which is the other word that is, theme for the day for our conversation. So you work together on how to undertake evaluation, and to undertake evaluation in a better way, whatever that might mean. Can you describe the kind of activities that evaluation covers? What does evaluation mean in this particular sense?
For me, it's a very broad encompassing of lots of different types of activities. So there is a lot of time that needs to be taken for planning. There is the process of data collection, there is a process of analysis, and there's the process of dissemination. So these sort of phases will encompass lots of different ranges of activities. And something that we're quite interested in is actually how you approach those different types of activities. Typically in evaluation, and this is not always the case, but often the case, particularly with people that aren't maybe as confident with evaluation, there's a lot more focus on the data collection and the analysis parts, but the dissemination, the planning, less time is spent in those areas. And that's something that we're quite interested in, how we can improve how people interact with those parts of the evaluation, because I think particularly the planning phase is especially important. I know that's something Elisavet and Pinar have been working on with the EViD tool, so maybe you'd like to share a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think evaluation has all these stages that Violet explained. Evaluation on its own, it's a process about learning. It's a learning process. It's not about placing your position on a scale. Is it good? Is it bad? And where you placed? But it's more about embracing a process that will help you understand what works well, what doesn't, what you can learn from your activities if you were to evaluate them, where are the different types of value that you're producing through your work, what is the impact that you have through your work. It's all about thinking how you can capture or evidence that impact and how you can then communicate it to others in meaningful and purposeful ways, in ways that produce further impact, further value. And again, obviously, reflecting and thinking from that process of evaluation and evaluating, what did you learn? What changes can you make? Are there changes in behaviors, new learning, new knowledge that you can embrace? So it's all about learning, uncovering something that you don't already know, learning, and adjusting. And going back to what Violet was saying, that process, it's not often understood as such. Very often people see evaluation as a tick box exercise, as a bureaucratic process, something that happens at the end. Very often we bring evaluators, experts, into the process to conduct evaluation for us towards the end of the project, where they try to act as detectives and go back and collect some data, trying to understand what happened, what is the value. But we are big advocates on thinking evaluation, about evaluation differently, embracing the evaluation process early on, embedding evaluation into a project and into your project activities and into your work, your practice. and starting planning and exploring early on, involving others in the process, help create evaluation capacity within your team so everyone can contribute to the evaluation process and learn from it. As a result, increase your confidence about evaluation, what is that you're trying to achieve, how to do it. So increasing that confidence will also then help you communicate it better, but also the next time you, for example, putting a funding bid together, you will be in a much better position to explain that I know how to do my evaluation. I have a plan. I'm planning to involve others in the process. I might need more resources to do it as well, or more time. If I'm expecting to see long-term impact, for example, I have a plan when my project finishes on how to capture that impact later on. Things like that. So we're big advocates at thinking about evaluation more holistically and exploring and thinking how to do it differently in ways that work for you.
Which ties in with the book that I've mentioned, the little book of creative evaluation. Can you give examples of what creative evaluation might mean? And I know in that book there are several case studies that you've got there of companies you've worked with and explored how they've done it, and maybe some examples of what creative evaluation can be on a practical basis.
As part of developing the book, we looked at some underpinning principles of creative evaluation. We always encourage everyone to look at the book. It's great. But
you can find it on creativeevaluation.uk.
Yes.
It's available online.
We'll also make sure that it's attached to this podcast, so we can't miss it.
Fantastic.
And you're not getting any royalties.
No, but that was the point. We wanted it to be free. But
Perfect.
Yeah.
Sorry, Violet.
I don't think Jan was so much concerned about you getting royalties as us getting royalties there. It very much sounded like Jan was after a cut. But, never mind, Jan.
No, I'm a creative accountant. So not the same thing.
So we've created some principles to help underpin what creative evaluation means to us. And first of all, it's probably worth saying that we don't describe it as a framework. It's a constellation of approaches, methods, methodologies. And the examples that we have drawn from all different sorts of industries, all different sorts of practices. So we're looking at, when we've created the book, we've looked for different examples of how people have been creative in their approach to evaluation. So it's not simply doing artistic activities, which often people associate with the idea of creativity, but it's where if people thought outside of the box to evaluate and how they actually approach establishing impact of what they're doing. And sometimes this is getting them to involve like different groups of people. So collaboration, participation is really important often in creative evaluation processes. So assessing, which groups of people need to be involved and which voices need to be heard and responded to in order to evaluate and to establish value that's being created. It also covers things like learning. So learning is a really important process, which Elisavet's already touched upon, but that's one of the things that really underpins the types of things that creative evaluation approaches do. And that's something that tends to be prioritised throughout. Through promoting learning, through prioritising learning, you also get things like the creation of new networks and collaborations, and you get better dissemination because people are involved in the process, so they understand the outcomes, and that improves the impact that an evaluation can have. So there's so many ways that creative evaluation and these principles that we've generated help to improve the processes, but also the impacts and outcomes of an evaluation. And in the book, we have lots of different sorts of examples, but they can be from very simple things like putting a question on the wall and having a post-it note to answer it, such as they did at the Jewish Museum in Berlin, or it can be something more complex and more comprehensive, like whole methodologies, such as the storytelling methodology. And that was the old fire station.
Yes, the old fire station.
Yeah, so
yes. Oxford.
Yeah, Oxford.
Old fire station in Oxford.
Yeah, so I think that's also something that's interesting about creative evaluation. It doesn't need to be something very complex and very time consuming. They can be off the cuff, quick activities, as well as full, robust methodologies. So it's also having that flexibility in the types of methods and approaches they're using, which we also characterise in creative evaluation.
It sounds to me like what you're saying with all these processes, the different ways of thinking about evaluation, that evaluation can generate a positive outcome. It's not just a piece of paper that says, this is what's happened, and then you just put that in a drawer and never speak of it again.
100%. Even uncovering that you failed certain parts of what you were trying to achieve. You didn't perform as you wished to. There were some mistakes that happened. Even if that's the learning from the process, evaluation sees that as an opportunity to make changes. It doesn't stop there. No evaluator would ever identify that that was a limitation, so that's the end of the story. But instead, they would suggest how to make improvements, what needs to change in order for that not to happen again, or how people can train themselves in being able to address certain challenges and so on. But even if you're not an evaluator who comes in to assess certain things, and you do evaluation as part of your professional practice, it's what you do. So within everything else you do, if you're a project manager, part of your job is to also evaluate, for example. Again, it's all about learning and understanding better the different processes, what worked well, what are the different types of value of your work, how you can evidence this, how you can communicate them, and less about and less about identifying shortcomings. But also, just to point out that it's also about accountability and transparency. So evaluation also helps us to be held accountable for what we do, organizations to be held accountable, and companies and governments and big institutions, and at the same time helps increase transparency, because when you make the outcomes of your evaluation or findings or insights from your evaluation public and available to others, then you help increase transparency about your processes, about your plans, about the way you do things, and about also the process of holding yourself accountable at the same time.
And what I really like is I've heard that language before, and in particular we had an early podcast about benchmarking, which also was trying to aim at that sort of, well, it is an evaluative practice of some sort, and it's aiming at that accountability, transparency. But it doesn't sound like evaluation. And so I wonder if you have a sense of the difference between evaluation and benchmarking or ranking of things, and how these things differ from each other, and also when might be the time to evaluate and when might be the time to benchmark.
For me, there's a big difference between those sorts of words, those sorts of terminology. Lots of people might interpret this in different ways or have different opinions on these. But for me, benchmarking, is comparing two things, potentially more things. But this is where this is what we want to achieve, and this is what we have achieved. So for me, it's more talking about outcomes, but it's not exploring the why, the how. So the evaluation is where that comes into the story. So you might do a benchmarking activity and then you might evaluate that, or you might evaluate something in order to inform a benchmarking activity. So these processes often interlink, which is why I think sometimes they get confused and people associate them with each other. And it's the same when people talk about like monitoring. Monitoring often forms part of an evaluation, but it's not an evaluation. It might be an evaluative activity, or it might be something that informs an evaluation. But I think it's really important that people understand the sort of literacy that we're using here. And I think that's where actually some of the confusions around evaluations exists, and why people can be apprehensive about evaluation because they're not necessarily clear on it. And it's the same with ranking. Ranking is often used within evaluative processes, and it can be really useful to identify anomalies. It can be useful to identify, where something seems to have worked or not worked. But the evaluative process is about understanding the value, the impact, the why, the how.
So a lot of the context we spoke about around rankings and benchmarking was relating to sustainability activity. Could evaluation processes be well used to assess and to go through and look at the whole process of how a company or an organisation is adopting sustainability actions?
100%. And we've seen that there's an increase on that. Thinking of evaluation as a practice in relation to sustainability, trying to achieve certain sustainability objectives, goals, aims, but interestingly as well, sustainability understood more broadly, environmental sustainability, one thing, social sustainability, economic sustainability, and holistically everything around it. It's a big part of evaluation because because of the nature of evaluation and what the outcomes that it produces, being able to feed back into strategies, into making changes within an organization, changing behaviors, producing new knowledge that can then be applied on how to make things better, helping you also understand your relation to the world as well, because if you do it in a more open way and you try to map, for example, what is happening around you, if you try to bring other stakeholders in the process, you also engage with your broader environment in a more meaningful way. So you learn from that process. So it has these qualities that can help towards sustainability, again, thinking about it from different perspectives, environmental, economic, social, cultural, for an organization, for a team, for a project even, for a larger institution, and so on. Just because it has the ability to produce new knowledge, new findings, better understanding of what we do and how we can change that towards achieving sustainability in the future in how we understand it in a given context. So because evaluation, good evaluation takes into account the particularities of the context, thinking of the broader environment, thinking of the nature of their operations within an organization, thinking of the people involved, thinking of the communities around an organization, that those interaction, different partners, stakeholders, I think very well connects with thinking about sustainability, how we explore that, how we plan for sustainability, how we understand it, and our strategies about achieving that.
Because it is such a complex issue around sustainability, there's so many facets to it. Is that where creative evaluation particularly comes into play a role, not just doing your what might be classed as standard evaluation?
Yes, absolutely. Because of creative evaluation, and again, it's a constellation of approaches where you can think things more creatively, so you employ creative thinking. Creative thinking could be that exploring further or trying to analyze things differently, or how you engage with others in different ways. And creative methods. So creative methods can help you with increasing your engagement, collecting evidence and data from different stakeholders more effectively, even increasing your the dissemination of your work, like of your evaluation, but the value of your work in better ways. Because of the nature of those activities, yes, I think they have the potential to produce richer outcomes and findings that might relate to different conceptions and ideas of sustainability depending on what is important to you. And again, because an evaluation is not something that you can take, it's not one size fits all. You cannot take one evaluation and use the same exact approach for a different organization. So because evaluation is something that you need to design in a way that works for you, for your organization, for what you want to achieve, again, sustainability could be embedded into your evaluation. You can evaluate, as you evaluate about other things, you could also evaluate for sustainability. Or when you think about your sustainability, you can think about how your evaluation serves that purpose, your sustainability strategy, for example.
So I wonder if you had like your very, very favourite evaluative practice or an example of evaluation that you think, oh, wow, that's incredible. And if you did have something in mind, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about it.
I think one of my favourite approaches that I've seen isn't so much about what the evaluation is, but it's the purpose underpinning it and why they've selected the evaluation approach, which I think is more meaningful. So the Good Things Collective, they're a cooperative group based in Morecambe. They do lots of interesting sort of creative work with the community. They were doing a project where they had to collect some evaluation data from people attending their event, and they had to get a partial postcode. Through this process, they didn't want to detract from what they were doing at the event. That was really important to them, that the evaluation process didn't take away from the enjoyment of the activity. And also, they're asking for something quite personal. You're asking for someone's data, and not everyone can always feel very happy about doing that. So they had to think about a way of collecting that data without imposing on people, without detracting from the experience. So their creative evaluation approach they came was making these giant tea bags and these tea bag labels where people wrote down their evaluation feedback and then put it into a giant tea box with a big teapot. So it brought an element of fun and playfulness, and it meant that it was part of the experience embedded within that, but also collecting the type of data that they needed as a requirement of their funding. So for me, that I found that quite inspiring, because they're not just thinking about doing a survey that anyone could do, but actually how the evaluation could enhance the experience of the people attending that event.
So for me, a good example of where I thought like not so much like the whole evaluation was something that it was fantastic and brilliant, more so about thinking creatively, and an example of thinking creatively about how to evaluate within a specific context, a project context, is an example from the BPART Beyond Participation project, which is a research project that brings together teams of researchers, artists, and community members in London. And they designed a card game to help them align their understanding about what it is that they want to achieve evaluation-wise. So they played a game, they designed the game, and they played the game early on in order to be in a position to make sure that they understand each other, they understand the difference in values and priorities and challenges that people might expect to see in that process, to help them create a space where, because of the way the game is played and everyone takes a turn, it's a card game. It follows the traditional card game rules, and because of that, all the players are on equal level. Each has 2 minutes to talk. They take turns. No one can interrupt you. If there are power dynamics within the group that are uneven, then it helps bring everyone to the same power level, to the same level, and gives people the space to talk about things that might be uncomfortable. But if you spend the time if you invest the time of doing that together as a team, then it can really help everything from how you work together and collaborate, but also how you evaluate collaboratively, because that was a priority for them. And they designed a card game, in order to achieve that goal of conducting an evaluation for a research project collaboratively. And that for me was a great example, and we were very inspired. You can find that example on the little book of creative evaluation as well, is featured, so feel free to explore further.
I think, Jan, that's a good place for us to draw this conversation to a close, and it's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you very much, Elisavet and Violet.
And I now much better understand some of the tasks ahead of me as a director of the Pentland Centre for Sustainability and Business, because we're heading towards the 10th anniversary, and I had in my mind I needed to do some evaluation, but that is as far as it got, and now I'm further on, and I hope that we might be able to have some conversations about that and going forward.
It's not just going to be the tip box exercise then.
No.
Good. Glad to hear. You've learned something today.
I have learnt many things today.
Thank you so much for having us. A great pleasure, really nice. And we're very sorry that a colleague Pinar cannot be here with us, but
she's here in spirit.
Here in spirit, yeah.
Well, Jan, next time we're going back to Australia.
Great.
It's only been a week since we've been there, but we're going back again. You just can't get enough of going back down there. We're going to be speaking to Nick Barter, and he's going to be talking to us all about the concept of future normal.
That'll be brilliant. And Nick's originally from the UK, but has moved down under, and I think just can't leave the sunshine.
Well, as we discovered last time, it's a lot warmer in Australia, even in winter, than it is here in summer at the moment. Until then, I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Babington.